Everything you need to know about Pitt from the guy who covers Pitt. Nick Farabaugh of Locked On Pitt will join us right here on Locked On Vols on a Thursday.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome into it. This is Locked On Vols, your go-to Tennessee Volunteers podcast each and every day, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And guys, thank you so much for making Locked On Vols your first listen each and every day. You can find me on Twitter at _Caner. Find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vols. And it's 5 days a week. Wherever you find your podcast, we're talking Tennessee Volunteers football. And a big matchup coming up later this week with Pitt. And really looking forward to that. Want to make a quick note here. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Upside. Download the free Upside app and use that promo code Locked On to get $5 or more back in cash on your first purchase of $10 or more. That's promo code Locked to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. That is at Upside. Got a really fun show coming up today, guys. I'm really thrilled about it. As I mentioned in the cold open, Nick Farabaugh, Locked On Pitt, going to talk all Tennessee, going to talk all Pitt, that matchup. I kind of run things in segment one, asking him questions about Pitt. He returns serve in segment 2, and then we'll get Josh Ward coming up in segment 3. So a lot more of other people, not much of me in this show. So you're welcome for that. But as we continue to work towards a kickoff on Saturday, wanted to get these voices on the show. So without further ado, Nick Farabaugh, the host of Locked On Pitt. We do a little crossover edition, and here is part 1 of my conversation with Nick. We got a Locked On crossover edition, and it's Locked On Vols meets Locked On Pitt. I'm Eric Kane. Nick Farabaugh over there, host of Locked On Pitt. And, we were joking off the air, man. It's been exactly 1 year since we spoke. We talked, it was your first week with the network last year, and Tennessee and Pittsburgh. Now, round 2 of the Johnny Majors Classic. I think I know Tennessee fans are jacked up about it. I'm sure Pitt fans are as well.
Yeah, they are. And this is a big contest for both teams. For Pitt, I think that, they stayed stagnant in the AP poll this week for Pitt, stayed 17. I think they're feeling a little disrespected by that. They thought they beat a Power 5 team. They should move up. Well, what a better way to prove yourself than against another ranked opponent in the SEC that really looks to be on the ascent. So I think Pitt fans are jacked up about that. And I think, obviously, the Johnny Majors Classic, the allure about it, it's just great. So how can you not be jacked up about that type of football?
Hey, real quick, are they? Is there a statue of Coach Majors going up? Is that the big thing with what Pitt's doing this weekend? Is that accurate?
Yeah. So that'll be a big thing. And obviously, Johnny Majors has been so influential to both these programs. It's like a match made in heaven. It's like, why didn't this happen earlier? So it's gonna be great.
Yeah, I really can't wait for that. I hope, and I've heard rumors, I hope Tennessee wears orange pants because Coach Majors love the orange pants. So we'll have to see about that. All right, Nick, this Pitt team, man, no more Jordan Addison, obviously. You've talked ad nauseum about that this offseason. No more Kenny Pickett. You've talked ad nauseum about this offseason. But Kedon Slovis comes in. I think that he can do well with the play-action pass. Played well against West Virginia, only 16 attempts. But it looks like Pitt, no more Mark Whipple, wanting to run the football. Even when there's no success there, they're going to want to run the football. Is that an accurate take?
I'd say that last week was a little bit of an outlier. I think there's a mode to this offense that they showed a little bit in the second half where they went shotgun and really tried to spread them out, a little bit more Mark Whipple style in that regard. But I think there's like 3 modes to this offense. There is that run-heavy approach that they tried to use early on in that West Virginia game, but I also think there's kind of a hybrid approach to both of those where they spread you out of under center and working shotgun. And then there's obviously the pure shotgun, empty set stuff. I think Frank Cicchetti's offense has a lot of different modes to it. And I think there's going to be a different mode to this offense this week than it was last week. So I don't think you're going to see the 7 offensive linemen this week. I think what you're going to see is 3, 4, 5 receivers, empty set, spread them out. You're going to see 30, 40 passes this week. And that's what Frank Cichetti's talked about. We're not going to be stagnant in one game plan or area. Yes, we're going to run the football more, than, say, Mark Whipple did. But if that's not working, we'll adjust. And they did adjust last week when the running game was not working in the first half. What did they do? Go shotgun. They decided to run the ball a little bit less. And eventually the passing game opened up the rushing game. And so Frank Snay will make those in-game adjustments. And he'll say, okay, if the running game's not working, we're just going to pass the ball to death on you. And so I think that's something that they're still feeling out. I think Kedon Slovis and Frank Snay are still kind of feeling out what works with each other. But I do think that there's more of an emphasis on running the football, but I also think that this is a versatile offense, and they're going to do whatever works best for the game plan.
You know, it's interesting, the ability to adapt and to change a little bit. It's week 2, and you're right. You're still kind of filling that out right there. But you got a quarterback that can do that. He's not Kenny Pickett, but Kedon Slovis is a good player. I mean, he is. Obviously, look at his career at Southern Cal. Last year when Tennessee played Kentucky threw their game plan out the window, and Will Levis threw it 30 times by halftime, more so than any time, more so than any 2 quarters throughout his entire career in Kentucky. And I forgot what he finished with, but I mean, Kentucky went pass for pass with Tennessee last year and trying to keep up with them. I'm intrigued to see maybe Pitt adapts a little bit to try to keep up with that high octane offense. So that's interesting. I'm glad you told me that. That offensive line you mentioned, all experienced guys. You return like 4 or 5, and as you mentioned, at points of times there were 6 and 7 offensive linemen out there at one time. They're all experienced. You got Jared Wayne on the outside. Got a former Tennessee guy and Gerard. Apparently he goes by Bub Means now, but he's on the outside. And then you got a big tight end in Bartholomew. What do you like about obviously the playmaking ability of Jordan Addison's not there anymore, but still return a lot of guys to this offense that had success a season ago?
Yeah, it's an interesting group because it's a lot of transition, as you mentioned. The lead dog of this group has clearly been Kanani Mumfield. It has been the Akron transfer who was a freshman All-American. And he was really good last week, too. Probably should have had more yards in it, probably a touchdown or 2. Him and Slovis aren't quite on the same wire yet. You can see first play of the second half against West Virginia, he was wide open. Slovis thought he was going to go in a little more. He kept going wide. And so they should have had like an 80-yard touchdown, but it ended up being incomplete. Mumfield's a great route runner, so he'll be the lead dog in this race. I like these receivers. I don't think they're quite as good as they were last year, obviously with Jordan Addison and Taysier Mack and all those guys. But Means is an athletic, high upside guy. You know who Jared Wayne is, solid player. And then you got Jaden Bradley and Jalen Barden. These 2 guys, Barden a real speedster that can take the top off the defense. Bradley more of a size guy that wins a lot in contested catches. Between Wayne, Means, and Bradley, all those guys are 6'2" or bigger. So Pitt has a little bit of size in this room this year. Bartholomew obviously is rock solid. And this running back stable is also a really good part of this team and why they are so comfortable running the football a lot, because they have a Bandy Kanda, Hammond, Davis, Flemister, even Daniel Carter, their fullback, has gotten involved. So it's a wide array of weapons. And I think it's a pretty solid group. I don't think it's quite as good as it was last year. But I think it's a decent group that can stress most defenses in the country.
Yeah, you had 3 guys last year that logged over 100 carries, and the leading guy in that regard, Davis, as you mentioned, didn't even log a carry in week 1. That's kind of how deep that Pitt is at running back right now. Let's flip the script. Defensively, Pat Narduzzi, not happy whatsoever with the way his team was ran all over against West Virginia. Now it's a rivalry game. You throw everything out the window. It is what it is, right? An experienced front 7 in the front with Baldonado and Cansey, and then you bring back Dennis at linebacker, who's a really, really good player. That front 7, who I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, returned 6 players who garnered all ACC honors a season ago in first, second, or third team or whatever. What's that defense going to be like this year? What are the challenges for that defense in regards to covering this tempo offense for Tennessee?
Yeah, it's a defense that is experienced in the front and in the back. But the linebackers are where you have a lot of transition. This defensive line returns everybody but Keyshawn Kent. And another thing, obviously, is Desmond Alexander, one of the captains of the defense, hurt a shoulder against West Virginia. We don't know if he's going to play. So that could be a big factor. But his replacement, John Morgan, had 3 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. He's really good. He's grown into his own. He's a senior leader as well for this team. So look out for him. The corners are a strength of this team. Pitt's cornerback room might be better this year than it was last year. MJ Devonshire had a really great game against Tennessee. He's grown into his own. You hear Pat Narduzzi just raving about this guy. Yeah, you just hear him, kind of raving about this guy all summer. And you're like, well, what's that going to look like? And then he comes out and puts on a performance like that. Obviously, Servassier Dennis in the middle there, but Bengali Kamara young guy playing at Pitt's star linebacker position, had a bit of a rough game last week. That's going to be something to look at. He's inexperienced. He had a great first half and probably just as bad of a second half as he did a good first half. So he's an up and down player. We don't know much about him. He's had flashes, but it's a question. Shane Simon, the money backer from Notre Dame, super athletic, where he makes unbelievable plays that could change games. And then he can do that on the opposite end, too. So this linebacking core is a little inconsistent. And they don't rotate as much as they did last year. Last year, they were 6 deep. Now they've played mostly the 3 guys here. But Pitt's also probably going to be missing Brandon George, their backup Mike linebacker. So Sebastian Dennis is going to be stuck in the middle, even though they want to move him around. So that's going to be the thing with this defense. Slowing down Tennessee is going to be tough, obviously, just because of the type of defense Pitt runs. That Pat Narduzzi defense is not meant to stop this type of offense, especially a quarterback like Hendon.
Hey, last thing I got for you. I lied. I got 2 things for you. I'm sorry. There's just so many things I want to ask you. I read last year's Pitt defense was 2nd in the nation in sacks, but was 12th in the ACC against the pass. How was that possible? Why could you be so great in getting after the quarterback when it's all tied in and then give up, I think it was like 274 through the air? What was your take on kind of how that worked last year?
Yeah, well, look at the run stats too. They're great run defense. Well, what's Pat Narduzzi's defense built on? Stopping the run. That's what it is. I mean, they play quarters cover 0 all game, and what that means is they're blitzing their linebackers a lot. They're bringing their safeties. That D line, it doesn't matter. They are selling out and shooting the gaps as fast as they can. So really, your safeties and your corners. And last year, this was a very inexperienced secondary. So this was a secondary that had a lot of transition. Now they're more experienced, but this was a secondary that, quite honestly, didn't have any help. They never do. That's kind of the story of Pat Narduzzi's defense. So basically, Pat Narduzzi is willing to allow some explosive plays, and those stats will rise up a little bit in the passing yards because he thinks stopping the run and forcing those turnovers by being aggressive up front is what will allow Pitt to win games. And obviously, last year, I think he proved to be somewhat right about that.
Yeah, okay. I guess that makes sense. And obviously, Pat Narduzzi is a run-first defensive coordinator type head coach. Last thing, you mentioned a couple of guys, a little bit of an injury bug. Deslin Alexandre, we'll see about him, the backup Mike linebacker. Hearing rumors about Rodney Hammond Jr., who had a really good game against West Virginia, and maybe some injuries on the offensive line. Anything to that in terms of the health status heading into tomorrow or to Saturday?
So some health things. When you talk about Deslin Alexander, the shoulder injury, they don't really know quite yet how long he's going to be out. He could play this week. It's, from what I've heard, it's an injury that is serious enough where he might need surgery, but he can maybe play through it. So I'm not sure exactly what that injury is, but we'll see. It's going to be a pain thing, apparently, with him. With George, he's been out a month plus now, apparently, with a high ankle sprain. So maybe he returns now. It's about a 6-week injury. He's right along that timeline, so maybe they get him back. When you look at Gabe Hoy, the starting right tackle, didn't play last week due to an injury. Kedon Slovis, the backup, got benched for Branson Taylor, the third-string right tackle, who ended up being really good. So I would expect Branson Taylor to get the start there. I expect Hoy to be back maybe against Western Michigan. Rodney Hammond, they thought it was a minor ankle injury, went back, and it was worse than they thought. So what I've heard is 3 to 6 weeks for him. He's probably out of this game, no questions asked. So Pitt will be out. We'll be without Rodney Hammond Jr. is what it sounds like in this game, which is a big blow to their offense, obviously.
Yeah, well, at least you have depth at running back, that's for sure. But no doubt about it. He got 16 carries, and I think he had 2 receptions against West Virginia a week ago, and he was a big guy for that Pitt offense. But that's what you need to learn about Pitt. We'll get you what you need to learn about Tennessee from a Pitt perspective. Nick will take over when we return here on this crossover edition. It's Locked On Vols and Locked On Pitt. More with Nick Farabaugh of Locked On Pitt coming up in just a minute. But first, from cringing at the pump to getting eye-popping check at your favorite restaurant, inflation is hitting us all where it hurts. And guys, it really hurts. That's why I started using Upside. Upside, it's an incredible app for anyone who buys gas, groceries, or dines out. With every purchase, I'm earning cash back thanks to Upside. It's really just incredible. I mean, you've got the app on your phone, and it's fantastic for you in terms of just trying to save some money or trying to earn some money rather when times are just so tough with this right now. To get started, you can download the Upside app and use that promo code LOCK to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. Check in at the business, pay as usual with a credit or debit card, and that's how you get paid. In comparison to credit card rewards or loyalty programs, you earn 3 times more cash back with Upside. Upside users are earning more than $1 million every week. That's right. That's probably why they've got a 4.8-star rating on the App Store. So download the free Upside app and use promo code LOCK to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. That's $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more using promo code LOCKED.
Folks, welcome back to this Locked On crossover edition, Locked On Pitt, Locked On Vols. I'm Nick Farabaugh with Locked On Pitt, and Eric Kane here from Locked On Vols. And Eric, we just had a great discussion about Pitt and what they did, but I have a lot of questions about this Tennessee team. Now, Last year, there were a lot of fans that seemed like were very happy with the season Tennessee had, just from the progression point from what Josh Heupel did. Now this year, how is this offense different? A lot of familiar names on that offense that I think a lot of Pitt fans will realize, obviously starting with Hendon Hooker, but you have guys like Cedric Tillman, Jalen Hyatt, Princeton Fant had a big game against Pitt last year, Jamari Small, Jalen Wright. Like, a lot of these names are very familiar names. How is this offense different or better than it was a year ago?
Well, it's kind of funny because last year at this time, Cedric Tillman was not Cedric Tillman he is right now, right? I mean, Tennessee fans knew who he was, but he didn't do anything in 3 years and really didn't get going until like game 3, game 4 of last year. But he's a completely different guy. Obviously, Hendon Hooker, Pitt fans know who he is because he came in for Joe Milton, but he ascended and kind of took off there as the season went on. So this offense playing with a lot of confidence. You break 8 school records a season ago, and you finish top 10 in the country, number 2 in the SEC behind Alabama. Georgia, who won the national championship, actually finished 3rd. A lot of people say it's just defense there. They had an explosive offense, but Tennessee was better than them. Playing with a lot of confidence, but I do think that you can expand on the playbook a little bit more. Now, if you go back and watch the tape in Ball State, Tennessee ran like 5-6 plays. Tennessee didn't do hardly anything, okay? That will change against Pittsburgh this week. I think because Hendon is in his 2nd year behind, under center, if you will, I think it's understanding the offense a little bit better. I think you can do more with that. Move the H-back around a little bit more. At points in times, only half the field was in play, and you had a wide receiver standing still at the bottom of the screen last year. I don't foresee that happening a whole lot. And also, can Tennessee improve in the red area and on 3rd and short? That was 2 areas for Tennessee that it struggled a season ago. So it'll be interesting to see. They didn't do a whole lot against Ball State, but Tennessee's offense will do a ton against Pitt, in my opinion.
Pitt's been really good in the red zone and the 3rd down, so that's a very interesting point. That's a strength of theirs. But I look at this wide receiver room, it's a little bit different. Tillman's there, Jalen Hyatt's there. Jimmy Callaway had a big game against Pitt last year. But Brew McCoy's here now. You have some younger guys in that room as well. What about this wide receiver room is different, the same, and what's the expectation for this wide receiver room? How much speed is there? How much finesse is there? What type of wide receivers does Pitt go up against this week?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. It's a fast group, but the starting 3, Tillman on one side, McCoy on the other, they're big, physical on the outside, fast enough, but they're big, physical, short-term explosive guys. That's what Heupel likes on the outside. In the middle, you got Jalen Hyatt that is quick, can take the top off the defense, all that type of stuff. Behind those guys, you mentioned Jimmy Callaway, who honestly has been kind of a forgotten man, but might have the most talent of anybody in the room. But Callaway's got speed. Freshman Squirrel White, who's 5'10", 160, has a ton of speed you'll see in the slot. Walker Merrill, who will come in, has got some speed. Jimmy Holiday is one of the fastest guys on the team. He'll come in. He's got some speed. So it's a very fast group kind of behind, Hyatt's got speed, but kind of behind those the trio of starters that jump out there first. But the expectation is to pick up right where you left off last year. Tennessee didn't really know what they had in Velus Jones or Devontae Payton or Cedric Tillman for that matter. I mean, it was all unknowns, and they kind of, carved out roles as the season went on. They're still trying to do that. Those receivers didn't play a whole lot against Ball State because they rotated so much. But what you need to know is on the outside, big and physical. And then whenever you bring in the reserves, if they do rotate, you're going to get a whole lot more speed in there along with Hyatt in the slot.
Now, this offensive line, I think, is the key for either team because the trenches are going to be huge in this game. If Pitt can get pressure on Hendon Hooker, I think this changes a lot of things. Now, obviously, headlined by Darnell Wright, and he is a great player. But what about this Tennessee offensive line encourages you against such a really good defensive line that Pitt brings, or maybe worries you against this Pitt defensive line?
Well, it's a veteran group, obviously, and it's a little bit of a smaller defensive line, but very athletic, and that's something that Jerome Carvin, a fifth-year senior offensive lineman, spoke to reporters a couple of days ago. And he's a guy that's like we've seen this bunch before. A lot of these guys are the same guys we played last year. They're quicker, they're more athletic, they're not as big or bulky, so we kind of know what their style is, know that they're well coached and all that. So what gives me I guess optimism for Tennessee in regards to this question would be just like Pitt's defensive line, Tennessee's offensive line, they're all veterans. 4 of the 5 are starters returning. Javonte Spraggins was a full-time starter last year at right guard. Of course, Cooper Mays, who got banged up in this football game a season ago and missed it, he's returning at center. Darnell Wright, as you mentioned, is at right tackle. Jerome Carvin's at left guard. And then you've got a position battle left tackle to where potentially you have Gerald Mincy, who's maybe the most athletic guy of the bunch. And so you pair him with Darnell Wright, and that's a pretty good tandem at tackle. So the experience factor, they played a whole lot of football. This offensive line will be healthier, as I mentioned. Cooper Mays missed the game. Cade Mays got banged up at right tackle last year, missed a whole lot of snaps. And so Tennessee overall was just not healthy for this football game a season ago. Of course, Milton goes down, which might have been a blessing because Hooker, came in. But Tennessee was down 2 running backs last game, down a right tackle, down a center, down some guys on defense. So, we'll see. But the leadership and the experience of this offensive line is something I think will help. Now, the running backs will have to step up. The tight ends will have to stay in for 6-man protection sometimes. The running backs who are young will have to be, well in your pass pro because I expect Narduzzi to send them and play some games up front.
Now let's switch over to the defense. This Tennessee defense, complicated story, had moments where they showed out last year, but the passing yardage per game isn't very good. 122nd in the nation. It's a tough defense when you look at to kind of evaluate. How is it different this year? They returned some of their top guys in terms of some of their stats. But what about this defense is their strengths? What's their weaknesses overall?
Well, it's funny because the defense struggled so much a season ago towards the end, and you lose 3 draft picks from that defense. And so you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? The biggest difference is Tennessee has depth in places where it had no depth a season ago. Remember, one of the national storylines obviously was, the black eye of Jeremy Pruitt leaving, and then of course, hiring Josh Heupel, but all these players that just started for the transfer portal during that transition. Tennessee's numbers were horrific last year. Tennessee played 3 linebackers. 4 linebackers early in the season, then Juwan Mitchell, who's questionable for this game as well, missed the rest of the season. But Tennessee played 3 linebackers. Tennessee didn't trust anybody else other than Trayvon Flowers and Jalen McCullough to play safety. The difference is this year now you'll play a lot more corners. You'll play 2 nickelback spots. You'll play a couple of different linebackers. And really on the defensive line, they'll be rotating in and out every single series of the football game. So that's what's the main difference. Now, will this team take a significant step? We'll see. I think it can, even though it lost some talent from last year. I just think at points in times where you were having guys like Aaron Beasley and Solon Page playing so many different snaps at linebacker, and they just had no help. They were tired. No one could come in and play for them. Quite frankly, at times they weren't good enough to be on the field. But you're an experienced team now. You have a year under your belt, and you have guys that can come in and play. That's the biggest difference. Tennessee's rush defense was pretty good through the first, 5-6 games of last year. And then again, it just kind of fell off. We talk about good teams have depth to win in the fourth quarter. Good teams also have depth to win in games 10 and games 11 of the season. Tennessee just didn't have that last year.
Now, when you look at the secondary for this team, the obvious big name missing, Alontae Taylor, from this matchup last year. There's a little bit of transition there. You have Tamarian McDonald, you have Warren Burrell, you have a few other guys in that secondary, and you still have some experienced guys. Obviously, Trayvon Flowers is a very experienced name that I think Pitt fans are very used to. How do you look at this secondary right now going up against some of these Pitt receivers when that's probably Pitt's strength offensively is just how good their wide receivers are?
Yeah, we'll see. I like Tamari McDonald in the star position. He had an interception, play number 1 against Ball State. Again, I know it's Ball State, but that was good to see a guy that came in here and held off a transfer from Georgia Tech and Wesley Walker all fall camp and won the job, and they got a pick on play number 1. I really, really like that. At quarterback, you lose Alontae Taylor. You bring back Warren Burrell, who's been a 3-year starter, but Burrell has been picked on a ton, had a horrible Music City Bowl, had a bad couple of games there to end the 2021 season, and Ball State watched the tape, and they went right after him. And I expect Pitt to go right after number 4 at corner in this football game. So I don't know who's going to be on, if it's Wayne or Muntfield or whoever it is. Look for Pitt to go after number 4 from the beginning. Let's see how Warren Burrell responds. But Kamal Haddon's the name you need to know. Number 5, it's a junior college guy, was a little injury prone a season ago, his first year in Knoxville, but he missed most of camp this year. I don't know if he'll start because he's trying to work himself back, but played 16 snaps, graded out the highest, and had an interception last week. He is a playmaker at cornerback who will continue to play more and more and more. So I like Kamal Haddon, a new cornerback as well. Christian Charles didn't play in this football game last year. Actually, he did. He not on defense. He blocked a punt on special teams and set up Tennessee at the 2 early in that football game, but he's an impact player at cornerback. So again, it's just about having more options. Tennessee didn't have options a season ago. They played the same guys. That's where I think you might lose some serious talent in Theo Jackson and Alontae Taylor, but you have 3 guys who can come in and play now, whereas you just had 1 guy last year. I really do think that'll help Tennessee. We'll see the step it takes, but I think it will take some type of step just from the depth.
Then when you look at this defensive line, you have a lot of talented guys on that defensive line. You look at guys like Byron Young, Tyler Barron in there. It looks like what is a pretty solid defensive line. And again, I think this game is going to be one of the trenches on both sides of the football. What about this defensive line stands out to you? I think there's a few names that do, but as a unit, what do they do extremely well?
Well, I think they're athletic. I think Byron Young is a guy that can change a game. He was he and Tyler Barron both were kind of non-factors against Ball State. Tennessee didn't have a sack. Ball State was getting the football out pretty quickly. There's a couple different contributing factors there, but Byron Young and Tyler Barron will need to play well for Tennessee to win this football game, in my opinion. They need to get in the backfield. They need to take advantage of the injury situation that Pitt's having at right tackle right now. So, whether I think that's Tyler Barron, but nonetheless, you got to get in the backfield. Defensive tackle, Maury Thomas is a good player. He's now a 3-year starter. He plays a lot of football. Kind of a big question mark at the other defensive tackle. They rotate that all across the board a ton anyway. Karad Garland, Elijah Simmons, DJ Terry. But I do think this defensive line is athletic and quick. And they've got some guys who can come in behind him and really get after the passer. Freshman Joshua Josephs, James Pierce, Roman Harrison. Those guys will get in and play a little bit. It's kind of funny. I think you're going to have an athletic bunch going up against a very experienced bunch. And so, if the athletic team can run around the experienced bunch and get to the quarterback, I think that'll help Tennessee an awful lot. So I just think the front 7 overall is going to have to, play well, stop the run, and then stay at home as well, because I believe Pittsburgh is going to hit that play action pass over the middle and try to gash Tennessee a couple of times in the first half. Really awesome stuff there from Nick Farabaugh of Locked On Pitt, and love to do those Locked On editions during football season. I think you guys like them sometimes, other times you don't, but Nick does a great job covering both the Steelers and the Pitt Panthers. You can tell he's very much a stat-based guy. Does a really, really good job there. All right, to conclude a Thursday show, we're going to get Josh Ward for a little Ward Wednesday on a Thursday. That's coming up next right here on Locked On Vols. Had a whole lot of fun so far breaking down Pittsburgh, talking that matchup 17 against 24, Pittsburgh and Tennessee. That's coming up this weekend, this Saturday. And we're going to continue the conversation with Tennessee and Pittsburgh. And it's a day late, but for Ward Wednesday on a Thursday, we're going to bring on our buddy Josh Ward. Josh, the season, it's here. And overall, Tennessee's back in action. And a big showdown this weekend with Pittsburgh.
Yeah, we finally get to see some answers out there on the field this week, because the Ball State game, first game, and I think there's a lot to feel good about, but fans will feel better if they see Tennessee against a Power 5 team go get a win on the road. And, the opposite side would be if Tennessee does not win this week, it will create concerns. It's one game, it's early. So this doesn't tell the whole story, but we get some answers this week against a much more formidable opponent.
Yeah, what was your biggest takeaway from the Ball State game? I know a lot of this has been said about the lack of generating a sack, only 2 tackles for loss defensively, but, still had 2 interceptions, gave up really, just 1 touchdown. That last field goal they had to get 10 points was from a turnover deep in your own red zone from a couple third stringers. But nonetheless, what did you think of Tennessee's performance against Ball State to open up the season?
Tennessee did what it was supposed to. Tennessee went out there and destroyed Ball State. And I think already we've gotten so used to what Tennessee does offensively that it's easy to take for granted Tennessee beating a team by 49 points when that almost never happens here at least in the last 15 years against FBS teams. So for Tennessee to do that, that's all you can really ask. Was everything perfect? No. Did anybody expect everything to be perfect? I hope not, because it's a season opener and Tennessee still has things to work on as a team from a personnel standpoint. But Tennessee overall did what it was supposed to. Let's see this week, though. When we talk about, okay, now you take on a Power 5 team, a lot of that is, okay, now you take on line of scrimmage talent that's obviously better. Matchups from the secondary against Pittsburgh's wide receivers, that will be a tougher test. I mean, it is across the board when you go from Ball State to the program, at least, that won the ACC last year. But in terms of the Ball State takeaways, my first was that Tennessee went out there and took care of business and took advantage of a team that had no ability to match up against the Vols.
When you look at guys who kind of stood out in that football game, and I mean, the list is long, obviously. I mean, you check the PFF grades and pretty much, if you're not a nobody, you kind of grade it out there. I mean, there's always some exceptions, but thought Brew McCoy looked good in his debut. Jalen Hyde, obviously, with the start to Mary McDonald and Jalen Hyde. I mean, that was a perfect start. Thought Aaron Beasley flew around and played a very strong football game. Kamal Hadden played a good football game. What'd you think about Hendon Hooker? I mean, stats don't lie. He balled out, right, as he should. But I thought he was a little inaccurate at times. So what did you see?
Well, I think he probably has some throws that he would obviously like to get back. There's a completion across the field that, are you making it against an SEC team or this week against Pitt? I don't know. But in terms of his decision-making overall, how comfortable he is with the offense, I think that's the theme coming out of Thursday, that he just looked more confident. How could he not be? But that was the talk of the summers. Hendon knows he's the number one guy. He's a better understanding of the offense. He has better communication with the coaching staff because of the experience they have working together on the field. And that makes him better, which is important while you're still trying to bring Jalen Hyatt and maybe Jimmy Holiday and maybe Ramel Keaton, just a number of players, Walker Merrill, that are in bigger roles and trying to help replace those guys from a year ago. Jabari Small being a year older, I think, applies here. But the quarterback with the ball in his hands every single play, I think he has a great understanding of what he's supposed to do. And Joey Halsley, Tennessee's quarterbacks coach, talking about the communication with, if Hendon Hooker doesn't like something, they will do something else. So that goes back and forth, and I think that's really important for Tennessee's offense. That's the advantage of having somebody who's talented and who's proven, but also now experienced in the system.
Yeah, two-parter real quick. Big fan of the Josh and Swain show you guys are of Ramel Keaton. Thought he stood out and made some plays there on Thursday night. And then also Joe Milton. It's Ball State. I get it. Mm-hmm. Joe Milton should have been 9 for 9. Should have been perfect. Joey Halsey almost called him flawless. I thought that was great to see. Again, competition. Take it for what it is. But I thought that was really good to see from two guys that, Keaton can maybe help Tennessee out a little bit. And you hope that Milton doesn't have to. But if needed to come in, you want Milton to be able to help you as well.
Well, Keaton can help Tennessee as long as you're not expecting him to do what Javonte Payton did, or certainly what Velus Jones did. I don't imagine anybody's expecting that kind of production, but to be a player within the rotation that can help. I thought Brew McCoy, if we're talking about players that stood out, his physicality is what we heard about, and it showed. I know it's Ball State, but I think we'll see it again. And Brew's a guy that I think is going to be able to make plays in different ways, including in the screen game, get him the football quickly and see what he can do from a physical standpoint. He's a brute out there at wide receiver. But Keaton can help them, just like Merrill can. And Holiday, he has that touchdown catch. That's from Joe Milton with that just incredible throw. That throw is what NFL teams are going to see and say, we've got to get him in camp somehow. Whether he's drafted or not, there's a long way to go between now and that point, as he's going to try to be Tennessee's starter next year. But last year he was the starter for a reason. That's one of the reasons, Eric, because he can make throws and he has a physical ability that most humans don't have. That includes NFL quarterbacks in terms of skill set. Now, understanding, development, how does he process things against teams that can be more attacking? That's still a question, but the staff hasn't given up on Joe Milton. Him coming back to Tennessee is valuable to the Vols because nobody wants Hendon Hooker to go down. But we talked about during the summer, if it happens, because it happens all the time, all across the country, what do you have at the backup quarterback position? Tennessee has a guy that they at least know what to do and what they can do with him. And the ability is incredible. Swain's line I thought was great that Jimmy Holiday didn't catch that ball. The ball caught Holiday, and it sent him to the end zone. So credit to Milton that he stuck it out. And I think the friendship has to help the relationship he has with Hendon Hooker.
You don't have those skills, do you?
Are we talking Milton skills or the ability to have a football catch them and send them to the end zone? Because I think that, as long as the ball stuck to my body, that I could have caught it and then ran to the end zone from there. But it would have been all Milton. Do I have the skill set of Joe Milton? I can't think of one skill that I have that would be comparable to Joe's.
You look at Pittsburgh, it's a team that probably didn't get their best effort against West Virginia, but it's a rivalry game. It's a backyard brawl. They were able to get that win. Big-time gift in the fourth quarter of a pick six, holding on there at the end. Kedon Slovis, a pretty efficient football game. Pitt tried to run the football, no luck whatsoever. Defensively, Pat Narduzzi, not a happy camper. He's a DC, and his team got ran all over. What do you make of this Pitt game and the challenges it will present to Tennessee coming up this weekend?
Yeah, coming out of that kind of game, you can look at it from different angles. One would include, okay, they've been tested against a real team, not the best Power 5 team, of course, in West Virginia, but it's a highly emotional game and a team that was pretty well prepared going in, I think pretty well coached. So you get a test against a higher level opponent than what Tennessee faced. So it's easier to work on what you did wrong maybe last week in terms of line of scrimmage. Like, I promise you, that offensive line full of veterans, not pleased with how things went trying to run the football. Now, part of the negative is you went up against that kind of opponent, susceptible to injury, and they're dealing with that coming out of the game on Thursday. But I would expect Pitt is more prepared in trying to stop the run, more prepared in trying to run the football, even if Hammond's unavailable. They have other veterans in the backfield. So this is a team that it's going to be prepared for Tennessee. There's only so much you can do against a team that runs as fast as Tennessee does offensively. But Pat Narduzzi's seen it 3 times, and a lot of these players saw it a year ago. So this will be a good test for Tennessee. And if you're the favorite or the underdog, you'd rather be the underdog. And that's what Pitt is. So they get to play that. I do think I said this on the show, Eric. I think if you do the matchups, the motivation matchup is even because Pitt is at home coming off an ACC title and a win against Tennessee as a 7-point underdog. Tennessee is trying to show that it is one of the top teams in the SEC while being ranked behind half the league in the polls. And it lost to Pitt last year. So the motivation for Tennessee to avenge the loss, show that the program's on the rise, and for Pitt to show, yeah, we lost Pickett, yeah, we lost Addison, but we're underdogs against Tennessee. We'll prove you wrong. So big-time motivation matchup here on the two sides.
Yeah, the Panthers, big-time motivation playing at the legendary Acrisure Stadium. Josh, someone asked me yesterday for my score prediction. I'm like, I'm not ready to give you my score prediction. I'll tell you, I think Tennessee wins this football game. What do you have? Do you like Tennessee in this game? You don't have to throw a score prediction out there, but do you like the Vols?
I do like Tennessee. I struggle with this a little bit on the Sports Source on Sunday. We had to pick over, under, or the spread, and I went over. I think 68.5 is where it was at the time. And so since I did that, I got to stick with it, right? You can't just hedge through the week. So probably in the 38-34 range. Something weird has to happen on Saturday. It almost always does with a Tennessee game. Tennessee, Pitt, Heupel, Narduzzi, almost that's almost my lock that something weird happens in those 4 quarters.
Just polar opposite human beings in terms of styles and football play. He's Josh Ward. Catch him on Josh and Swain every single weekday, noon to 3 Eastern on 99.1 The Sports Animal. Josh, appreciate it, buddy. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. That's our friend Josh Ward. Appreciate him for joining us a day late on Thursday to get in our little Award Wednesday action. Hey, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Vols, your Thursday edition. Big thanks to our friends over at Locked On Pitt for the crossover, and of course, Josh Ward. We'll come back. We'll get you set for Pitt on a Feel Good Friday. Locked On Vols, that is coming up tomorrow to conclude your work week. Big thank you to for you guys for subscribing and making Locked On Vols your first listen, wherever you find your podcast, and of course on YouTube. We'll be back and get you set for kickoff. That's coming up for tomorrow's show. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, everybody.